Hey, and welcome everyone to Startup Savants, a podcast dedicated to helping aspiring entrepreneurs and startup enthusiasts by bringing you news, insights, and stories about the startups and founders that are making waves right now. I'm your host, Annaka.
And I'm your host, Ethan.
Our guest today is Jamie McCroskery of Bluebird Climate. Jamie is a former project manager at Dropbox and Glossier, and in his spare time, an alpine climber and expedition leader for the Sierra Mountain Club. During his tenure at Dropbox and Glossier, McCroskery introduced technological innovation while leveraging the power of analytics to grow conversions and strengthen customer loyalty to each brand. If you could, tell us a little bit about the history behind Bluebird Climate, its mission, and how you got started.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it starts with kind of a personal story. So as you had mentioned, it started in hard technology over software companies. It's like tried and true big tech, just solving functional problems for people, like connecting us via the internet. But as you can probably empathize with, tech companies are really good at functional problems, but consumers make up their minds for all sorts of reasons. They're often emotional, and brands really understand that. That's why I went to Glossier to help lead their technology department and do a bunch of experiments on different types of community projects they can build. And that's where I saw the sustainability problem firsthand. Their employees are all millennials who care about sustainability. Customers really care about it. Investors care about it. But no one really knew how to essentially introduce sustainable products in a way that wasn't going to blow up the business and also communicate that to customers. And so personally for me, I saw that happen. And as you mentioned, I do teach rock climbing classes and ice climbing and backcountry skiing and mountaineering in my free time, and would see glaciers receding and a bunch of people constantly talking about climate change and seeing it firsthand. And it seemed like an opportunity to kind of actually help make a difference, because beauty, personal care, fast-moving consumer goods, apparel, and food and beverage are three of the top 10 carbon-emitting supply chains. There isn't a ton of tooling to help them. Product developers and marketers essentially have to hire consultants. If you're lucky enough to get buy-in from the CEO, it takes months and months. But there is, we essentially saw an opportunity to help use software to make it easier to produce low-carbon products and then market that to their customers, which is what we do at Bluebird. Essentially make it so that you can in-house sustainability knowledge without having to hire if you're a brand. So you can make better decisions during product development. For example, the age-old glass versus plastics debate has an answer. And then even if you do that great work, we help you transparently and authentically communicate that work to your customers so that they're brought along with the journey for all the decisions you made.
So tell us, is it glass or is it plastic?
The answer is it depends on your supply chain. For example, I mean, that's why it's the answer always changes. So for some of our customers, they're producing products in the United States and sourcing packaging in the United States, and all their customers in the United States. So in that case, glass, which is way heavier and has a lot of breakage issues, which is not great for customers or sustainability, the carbon footprint is actually pretty good. But if you're getting stuff from China, which is the majority of customers, that's a long distance, especially for small companies who are often air freighting things because they could be better at planning. Then if you're air freighting glass from China, the carbon footprint is going to be massive. The reason for that is weight is a huge part of it, and it really depends on your supply chain and how you're transporting this stuff.
Good answer. All right. So Bluebird Climate. What is this product? Do you provide actionable tools to make your clients more sustainable, or is it a process of managing and optimizing their sustainability?
Yeah. So, and to zoom out, I mean, if you're producing products, most of your sustainability impact comes from the products that you produce. Yes, your employees could be driving to work and then using electricity in the office, but 95% carbon emissions come from the products in their supply chains. And that stuff is really hard to get a grasp on. So what we do is, essentially, if you upload products to Bluebird, we do a lot of complex, essentially machine learning intuition about your products and supply chains, so that you can essentially make apples to apples comparisons across different product concepts. So imagine you have 5 different pairs of jeans, different cuts, different fabric weights, materials, vendor locations. You can effectively see carbon emission estimations before you get into production, which is super helpful for both the designer and then also the marketer who wants to know what kind of stories they can tell around sustainability from the beginning and design it into the ethos of the product. And so the idea is like, okay, you have this like pretty easy to use sustainability decision-making software for your products. And then once you have all that data, because you have it in there, then you can press like a single button to then communicate that to Instagram and emails and on-site to your customers. The idea being like, oh yeah, if your customer goes to your website, looks at your product and wants to understand, hey, is this like, does this company actually care about sustainability? You can transparently say like, oh wow, this product actually travels 50% fewer miles than the average product of this type. And this leads to this kind of carbon emissions savings. And then we have all the data to back it up. So it's a software tool for product developers and marketers in these companies.
So you really just have a ton of data, and in the background, you're synthesizing that data to give actionable information to the brands before they make the product.
Yeah. And the idea is like, sustainability and supply chains are super complicated. And the reason why we're able to make it really easy is so we essentially are taking a very design forward way of developing products. So our head of design used to lead design at Kickstarter. So making software that brands actually want to use, not like something really, really complicated and archaic. And we also work with like a bunch of people from Patagonia and Levi's to take a lot of institutional knowledge about how to essentially assess carbon emissions and circularity. We bake all that knowledge into these computer algorithms that then like abstract all the complexity for people in the brands and say like, oh, you actually only need like these 5 pieces of data from your vendors, and then we can do all the rest for you. So yeah, it's behind the scenes, there is a lot of data because that's, what sustainability is. It's carbon emissions and, waste calculations. And then we wrap that into something that's really useful for the brand so they can communicate to their customers, make better decisions.
Gotcha. So you mentioned a word, and I want to go into the next question here. You recently wrote an article, Why Carbon and Circularity Are the Two Most Important Elements of Building a Sustainable Beauty Product. I think I know, and I think most people know what carbon is, but what is circularity? That's a new concept to me. Can you tell us what circularity is and expand on its importance when building a great product?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm amazed to see you're really doing your research and reading this stuff I'm putting out there. Yeah, that was written for like we talk to beauty company founders and sustainability teams all the time. And so they always ask us like, oh, like how do we think about sustainability? Is it biodiversity loss? Is it microplastics? Is it all the stuff in the landfill and in the oceans from a plastic perspective? Is it carbon emissions? And so the point that I was trying to make in that article was essentially boiling down a lot of that complexity, just like 2 things that you should care about, which ultimately go back to the 2 most important kind of environmental source of environmental impact for the industry. One is carbon emissions, as you know, which is global warming, climate change. And number 2 is circularity. I'm thinking about changing this already because people are confused. It's just waste. And the way, think about like plastic waste, like ends up in landfills or oceans, like 1 in 3 articles in landfills in the United States is essentially beauty and personal care products and packaging. And so the idea is like, if you can design for less material using either recycled components, so, recycled plastic resins, and also design for circularity, meaning like, it doesn't end up in a landfill, so it's either biodegradable or refillable or reusable or even just recyclable, then, you're essentially diverting waste that would otherwise end up in somewhere that you don't like, some landscape that you love, and actually goes back into the production stream, and it uses way less resources as well on the planet, which is, always a good thing.
That is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, unrelated completely, but doing research into like bioplastics and the different materials that are even available today is wild. Like, if you haven't looked at it, just go look and see all of the crazy stuff. Like, you can get clamshell packaging that's made out of algae, and it looks and feels and behaves just like plastic. And it's like, we've come really far. So the value, I think that sustainability and focusing on sustainability brings to brands is huge. And now we talked about working with brands as they're ideating products and things like that, is there any kind of structure for businesses that maybe already have products on the market and they're like, hold on, we want to go back and kind of and rethink this, and how do we kind of get that sought after sustainability badge if we're an old brand that's already got stuff in the works?
Yeah, totally. And a quick point on the plastics piece, I'd be remiss because we talk to, there's innovation happening all over the supply chain in materials, packaging formats, transportation, even. It's like fascinating. And so we talk to those kind of vendors all the time who are making like low carbon adhesives or low carbon plastics. One of my favorites is Sway. They essentially are making a kelp derived plastic bag that a lot of companies are starting to think about using for, in retail shops. Like, oh, you have an amazing story about this like regenerative technology that's now in this bag that customers can feel and use. It's a great story for the brands and retailers as well. But like, what's really great about it is they actually are going through the end-to-end own the entire supply chain, so they can know like which kelp farmers they're working with, can do all the quantitative analysis to say like, yeah, this actually is carbon negative. So like a lot of stuff like that's coming out, and I think like I just like them personally also, and our brands do as well. I think, yeah, to your point, yes, if you are a brand that's producing products already, we're essentially trying to meet you where you're at. We're not trying to like, make every single product this paper bag granola version of it.
Right.
It's essentially a Maslow's hierarchy of like, well, how much do you want to invest in sustainability? You're just getting started and trying to figure out what to do for existing brand, or are you like trying to create this insurgent, really innovative brand that's going to disrupt the space? Like, we build a software that works for both. So the idea is if you already have products, you can like upload it to Bluebird, and you essentially get a burn down list of like, hey, here are the things you're doing really well that you can celebrate today. A lot of stuff might be hidden. Like, for example, if you're not air freighting and you're actually co-locating your manufacturers and vendors in distribution centers, then like you're saving a ton of transportation emissions. That's like a real story. You should be able to celebrate. From there, if we give you a lot of the same tools, say like, hey, here's how you can improve if you want to. That's not going to completely destroy your P&L and margin. And then we similarly have the same kind of communication tools. So it's a lot of like this kind of carrot creating with like, oh yeah, here's the sustainability story you can tell that like, brings customers along. And then we highlight things you're already doing well if it exists, and then like give you the tools to find out things that you can improve without just blowing up your entire supply chain.
Yeah, so little small wins, like, hey, switch this out, switch that out, and rather than overhauling the whole thing. No reinventing the wheel.
Right.
Totally. I mean, that's a big misconception. It's like, hey, like, well, I know I have to use recycled plastic. It's super expensive because, companies like Unilever or whoever are just buying up all the recycled plastic in the world. So it's expensive for small brands. But there are other things you can do here that are not just like, spending tons and tons of money on different types of plastic, for example. Like a lot of it's hidden in the supply chain. They're pretty easy wins that, don't disrupt your business.
Are those easy wins something that you advise on to companies that you work with?
Yeah. I mean, so like right now I think the vision here is like, right now we're essentially providing information. Like, hey, here's the types of things you should be doing. Because like the brands kind of already have vendor networks or existing relationships, they can just ask their vendors to help make the changes. But I think over time, what we're trying to do here is essentially say like, well, if we know what products these brands are producing and it's really hard to, make these changes, if we know who all the vendors are and how to organize transportation and do everything in a low carbon way, it should be like as simple as like pressing a button to say like, oh, I want this like low carbon bag for my supply chain. And so we automate a lot of that. That's where we're going to go in like a little bit. That's the vision. But for right now, we're essentially just advising because we know these companies just need help.
Right. That's cool. That's cool that you've got that knowledge and that you're willing to share it. Let's talk a little bit about marketing, or rather just storytelling as brand. Why do you think that sustainability or telling a business's sustainable story is an effective tool for businesses to drive conversions?
Yeah, I mean, if you asked me a couple of years ago, I would be essentially giving you an answer being like, I hope the world exists in which customers care. So if you think about like the state of the world we're in, every summer you're seeing like essentially climate change is all over the place, right? It's like, Australia is burning like horribly a couple of years ago. You can't go outside the West Coast for like 2 months straight. It's pretty crazy. And so what that does is actually changes the customer. Sustainability then is in the forefront of customers' minds, which means that they're talking about it, which means that retailers and brands are paying attention. And so there's been a lot of research over the past few years to say like, oh, customers say that they care about sustainability, but their dollars don't actually follow. There actually is a bunch of research, and it depends on the product category and like how much performance is really important, or like identity is really important to either the customer or the product. But and why you came up with the study, it says like, sustainably marketed goods are growing 7.1 times faster and command this massive price premium compared to conventionally marketed goods. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. And so that's like, the academics are saying that stuff. And for us, like we essentially see table stakes rising both for retailers who are demanding this kind of stuff and giving preferential treatment. For example, Target has a pretty interesting merchandising program that rewards sustainably marketed goods, like backed with like real data. And so we see a few of our brands like getting preferential treatment using some of the stats we come up with. But for us, it's like, I think at bare minimum, there's a brand value in which customers want to support brands who are, hold similar values. And you can demonstrate that to them even after they make a decision post-purchase. There's like a lot of interaction we see that like demonstrates like, okay, yeah, like this actually is going to increase the repeat buying and like the relationship they have with brands. I think over time, like, we're gonna get more and more sophisticated to see harder and harder data around like, oh yeah, it's like for the later adopters who don't care about sustainability, does it actually move the needle? We'll see, but I think the tide is definitely rising here for sure. And it's like every single brand we talk to essentially say like, yeah, we need to say something about sustainability. And to like help us figure out what we can authentically do because customers are asking for it.
Yeah. And it seems like if you're, a product that you're looking for meets A, B, and C, and the second product is A, B, and C, but product 2 also has D, which is sustainability, that's going to start steer in that direction as it becomes more and more prominent in the world. So that would at least sell for me. I'd be like, yes, give me that carbon negative. Thank you.
Yeah, we like negative carbon emissions. And that's the thing. Like, there's some bit of misconception here because not misconception, but like customer preferences are changing so fast. So if you're like a Gen Z, if you're marketing Gen Z, is like they care, period.
Yeah.
It's not like,
about
this portion
everything.
Like, they all care.
Yeah.
In like my age group, there are later adopters who like care about it less, but like, like if you just look at demographics, like it's all kind of moving in that direction. It's just a matter of time. That's why all these large companies are making these commitments about being carbon neutral or negative, by 2030, because they know they have to essentially figure it out. Whether or not they actually do know how to figure it out, a different story, but at least they know. That's I think that's important for the brand.
That they're going to have to. Right. And so Bluebird Climate is a public benefit corporation. It's a difficult process to go through compared to other structures like a C Corp or an LLC. For anyone who might not be familiar, what is a public benefit corporation and why was it important for you to structure the company this way?
I'm so glad you asked that. So what a public benefit corporation is, it's essentially a legal framework developed by B Labs, so B Corp. And the point of it is to essentially put in your legal charter guardrails so that you are essentially mandated to go after not just profit, but also some sort of impact that you define. And that was really, really important for us up front because like we are a mission-oriented business. We're in the business to decarbonize the consumer products industry. And so we know if we bring on investors and other stakeholders, we essentially want those guardrails to be in place so that it's like very clear that we can't lose, that impact amongst the profit or whatever. And that's like essentially a discussion that me and my co-founders had from day one. It's like this business isn't worth it if we're not going to be in it for the impact. Otherwise, we could just like, go sell widgets or whatever that we like don't care about. And so I think from the major difference between LLCs and just to be clear, a public benefit corporation is actually a type of C Corp. And it actually isn't that much more rigorous. It's just like we essentially just have to report on impact on a yearly basis, which can be difficult to do, but it's baked into our products because that's the whole point, is measuring impact. But it's really, really helpful to also signal to investors and customers that you mean like you essentially have some. You're not greenwashing. You're essentially putting some real stake in the ground that you care about this stuff. So I would definitely encourage it. It's not difficult to do at all. It's a pretty new thing actually, and it's going to make it way easier for us to become B Corp as well, which we're I think pending certification as well.
Yeah, it just sounds to me like, hey, this mission is so important to us. We're folding this into our business structure, and it's there to hold us accountable.
Yeah, exactly. It's accountability, which we like. We like accountability.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And talking about,
go ahead. Go ahead, Ethan.
No, go ahead.
I was going to get
your answers better.
LLCs. I'm just talking at you guys. But yeah, the LLCs. I don't know. You guys probably have better guidance on LLCs versus C corps and all that stuff. We actually started as an LLC and then eventually switched over to C corp when we were bringing on outside investors because we need that kind of governance structure. But yeah, it's funny. It's I liked the days where it was just me and my LLC, getting to do whatever I wanted. And that business structure can go a long ways. But I think once you bring in outside capital, there's, it gets a little nuanced, depends on who your investors are. But I think the C corporation was helpful because we had regular board meetings, and all that stuff that we had to make documented notes for, and then also can bake in this mission-based impact reporting as well that holds us accountable. So it made a lot of sense to go with the C corp, public benefit corporation route.
Yeah, well, and I don't think that there are many people that are familiar with that structure and that it even exists. So if you want a public benefit corporation, go get one. I didn't know. So yeah,
right.
It's like a nonprofit but with profit.
Yeah,
that was a horrible joke.
Kind of like that.
We'll edit that
out. Yeah, you're not wrong.
So we're talking about certifications. Let's talk about the Bluebird certification. What is the Bluebird certification, and how did you take a concept from nothing and turn it into something that an entire industry cares about?
Well, I will say off the bat that is a work in progress. It's like anything in software startups, you essentially put something out and then you get your reception, then you iterate. How valuable is this to the market? Is it actually doing what you think you want to do? And just taking a step back on certification. So I think there's something like 250 green sustainability certifications that are just massively consuming or massively confusing to the consumer. It's how do you know what each one of these things are saying? Okay, what organic? What does that mean versus carbon neutral versus plastic negative versus EWG skin deep, safe for my skin? And so if you look at Amazon's website, they essentially are taking a lot of those certifications and then putting them up front for the customer to kind of filter through. I think what's interesting about them is they're all proxies for environmental damage. That's the whole point of sustainability is to say environmental impact and also health and social issues as well. And so what we are trying to do here is essentially say yes, all of those things are very important. A lot of them have very specific purposes that are very beneficial, but a lot of it's super confusing. And so what we're going to do is actually in our data models put a lot of those things in and do a quantification of what it means at the end impact for the environment, and then just show that end impact because that's what everyone cares about anyway. And so when we talk about the Bluebird certification, what we're actually doing here is helping brands demonstrate to their customers a few things. One is that they are actually systematically measuring and reducing environmental damage, which is not common. Even if you're a big corporation, you have a sustainability team, it's really difficult to do. And we're making that available for all of these small, medium-sized businesses to do it without hiring people. And then beyond that is on a product level, conceptually show the customer, it's hey, this product has less carbon emissions than other similar products for these reasons that are hidden. So for example, if the example we went to before, it's maybe you change how you're shipping or where your vendor's located. That is an opportunity to like show customers that you're doing the hard work that's otherwise hidden. And so the whole point of this like certification, quote unquote, for Bluebird Certified is not actually like a single certification. They're essentially like different stories you can tell to your customers that are based in data that demonstrate that you care and are reducing your environmental damage and even making positive benefits in some cases, like using packaging like Sway. So yeah, it's not just like, I think we're wary of the certification game because there's so many out there.
Yeah.
And so confusing to everybody. God, I mean, I don't even want to check in like 2 years to see how many there are going to be. And so our whole point here is like, essentially, the whole function of that for customers is to like understand how a sustainable product is, and we're just going to tell them. Is in an abstract way all that complexity is what we're trying to do, at least.
Yeah, and you don't have to like hunt down the definition of all of this stuff in one. Make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how the market receives it and brands receive it, because ultimately this stuff comes down to like brand value. It's like they're heuristics in decision making. It's like if a company sees a B Corp logo, that means a lot to customers. Like, oh, okay, this brand probably cares about the same things I care about and is doing the right thing. Organic, oh, this is probably healthy, or depending on whatever it is. Yeah. And so like for us, I think our challenge right now is like, part of it is actually just solving that problem we've been talking about for brands and customers, being able to like effectively communicate in like a trustworthy way. But at the same time, we also like know we need to build a brand around this thing so that people trust it and recognize it and everything, which is, always going to be a challenge for startups is getting that mind share and credibility in whatever space you're in.
Right, absolutely. Now, you said something interesting in there with Amazon. So I talk a lot about two-sided markets where you're marketing one to the consumer and to the brands that are facing the consumer. But in this case, you're kind of working with a three-sided market. You're not only marketing to the consumers that are looking at your certification and the manufacturers that want to have your certification on their product, but you're also marketing to Amazon and these other marketplaces and platforms. Is that when you can tell that it means something, or is it pretty easy to get onto the Amazon marketplace and say, hey, this is a certification that your users care about?
Oh, that's interesting. This space is complex. You have customers at the top, which everyone cares about because they're the ones who are giving the dollars to companies. You have retailers who are looking at customers and managing relationships with brands. Brands are responding to what customers and retailers want. And then you have vendors who are responding to what brands are asking for. And so they're all kind of looking at each other. I mean, like how much do people care? Like each individual stakeholder here. And so like, what you see is kind of competition starting to happen across all those different groups. So vendors are trying to become more sustainable and market that to brands. Brands are trying to become more sustainable, market that to vendors or to customers and retailers, and on and on. So I think for Amazon in particular, I don't entirely know how their system works and how hard it is to get in. But we definitely have seen a lot of interest from retailers. They're like, oh, all of our customers are asking for us to create like a database eco kind of like safe zone in which if certain products like have like the Bluebird logo or whatever, they know that's like low carbon or whatever. And so like for us, like that's huge in developing credibility in this space and also just increasing awareness. We're talking to a bunch of major retailers around it because like they also have carbon emission reduction commitments that they can only hit if they help their vendors decrease those carbon emissions, because that's part of their footprint. And so like that obviously is a much larger conversation in which you're like strategically working with a retailer to audit all of their vendors and give them tools to make improvements. That's different than like just showing a certification on like Amazon, I would imagine. But yeah, I guess just wrapping this up, some meandering here a little bit, is like retailers definitely care because they're like on the front lines responding to what customers want. They have a very interesting job though, because they have to manage the brand relationships. Like if you have, imagine someone doing like 50% of your volume in your retailer, you're like, oh, they're not as sustainable as their customers would want. Like, what then do you do about that? Do you like, help them change? If you have enough power, do you give them tools to make improvements, or just like not really do anything, which is a lot of what retailers are doing until they really, really have to.
I can imagine it's a little tough to untangle if you are a retailer that's huge, like probably hundreds of vendors at that point. How do you then kind of walk all of them through that? Like that just seems to me like I'd be looking at that like, yeah, let's wait on that for a little while. Untangle the ball first.
Totally. I mean, you can actually watch this evolution happening. Sustainability. I know I'm like getting so deep into sustainability and all of this stuff.
We love it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So you look at like Walmart did 5 or 6 years ago. You know, they have like the vendor scorecard, which is like, hey, we know this isn't perfect, but this is our stake in the ground. We're going to start measuring this stuff. And then they come up with like the Gigaton project, which has like higher fidelity kind of questions they're asking their vendors around, renewable electricity usage, for example. I think you just have to start somewhere in all this stuff. So like we have this 200-year-old infrastructure where from like the Industrial Revolution, and the globalization has made it so like all these supply chains are just duct taped together. Like I can't even describe to you how convoluted some of these apparel supply chains are. Like I think on average, some of the brands we're working with, like in order to get a t-shirt, for example, like really simple, dumb example, how far do you think like total mileage, like all the constituent parts have to go? You probably have no idea, but I'm curious if you guys.
No idea.
I'm going 6,000 miles.
Oh man, I'm going 3,000.
Okay, 3,000 miles. Okay, what is circumference of the Earth?
Oh, no. Oh God.
It's 25,000 miles. It goes like for a lot of these brands we've seen. You'll get cotton from India, for example, have that be woven somewhere else, and like and then shipped somewhere, and shipped to the U.S. to add a fastener, and then shipped back to them, like be cut the right way. Like these products being shipped around the Earth like 4 times. Same thing with beauty products. Not as bad. Like 25,000 miles is not crazy. And this is what I'm talking about. It's like around like some of the hidden stuff in supply chains. Like, well, like you actually just buy stuff locally, which again is probably gonna be more expensive because China is so cheap for a lot of this stuff. But like they're hidden. Right. There are hidden things you can talk about here. If you're a brand, like why not think like leaning to that a little bit, and not just have it be like a cost trade-off, it's actually a marketing upside. So yeah, if you're, I guess, zooming back out to like, Gigaton and all of these other retailers are trying to help these brands, it's like, man, like it gets really complicated. You got to start somewhere. And what we're trying to do is essentially get the next layer. It's like, the Web 3.0 version of like sustainability calculations that like everyone can easily use, because we just use big data to make it easier, is the hope and intention here, at least.
He just said Web 3.0, and I'm just going to let it slide.
I know, seriously. I barely.
We're not going to talk about. We're not going to talk about turning the Bluebird certification into an NFT. We're not going to talk about it. We're just going to blow right past that.
Buy this podcast. NFT, tokenize it. Yeah, exactly. I think I'm surrounded by too many founders in Silicon Valley, and I intentionally don't entirely understand the topic by design. It's too much.
All right, well then I will just move right past that. We're going to change gears. Let's talk about your team. Bluebird has a pretty impressive team with experience in some big name companies like Patagonia, Google, lots of other places. Were all these folks from your personal network as you moved through companies in Silicon Valley?
So I went through the long, no, it's true. I'm just thinking back about, when I started, I essentially left Glossier and like tried to plug into the climate technology scene a little bit, and was like stuck in my parents' basement during COVID, trying to figure out like what product to launch, what problem to solve, and like how to get people in my core, like in the fold to help build something. I was bootstrapping for a while, and that's a whole other topic we can go into about like fundraising and when it's time versus now and the trade-offs. But no, I essentially was like, man, I have invested all my time in big technology and working in brands, but I really care about the sustainability stuff. I had studied neuroscience in college and business to like combine technical stuff and business stuff to bring discoveries to the marketplace. And I always love the idea of sustainability, but it's actually a pretty like emerging science. Like life cycle assessments in which you quantify carbon emissions are like changing, like methodologies are changing rapidly, as is the underlying, measurement of soil carbon, for example. So I was in my parents' basement, and then eventually I connected to a mutual friend, Anisha, who was my first co-founder. She had worked at Unilever, and also helped like dozens of brands set up supply chains sustainably, and like we just kind of hit it off. And it's like all startups are momentum games. It's like it's yourself, and then you get another person, and then you bring in another person, and all of a sudden like you have a company or like a product people like and like recognition in the space. So for me, I like essentially just from my parents' basement started hacking away and talking to interesting people. So the Patagonia guys, like Eric Wilmans and Mike Brown, founded the Patagonia Environmental Assessment Program, which like essentially pioneered the space and being able to quantify, like environmental impact from producing products. I think they were just pumped. They're like, oh wow, you seem smart and like are really motivated clearly because you just give up your job or work in your parents' basement for your parents' basement. And then like, once you have someone there in your court, then like, okay, great. Now you have some momentum and can then say like, hey, other person, I know you care a lot about this stuff. Like, you want to join this thing that is moving, whether you're on it or not. And that is like always kind of like the game that, it's a little bit of a game you're playing because, at the end of the day, companies and businesses are all just people and how they feel and like momentum being a part of something big that's like going to succeed. And so like you got to kickstart that in some way. And that for us came by like going after people who are like really motivated to work together early, even when there was nothing there. And that's where Patagonia guys came in, and then it made it like way easier to convince other people to come on as well. So from there, we essentially then were able to raise venture money. We brought on like really early customers who were just motivated by us and like our mission. They were able to hire like the rest of the team from Google and Kickstarter and Levi's, Flatiron Health. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the same game too, that we're going to continue to build momentum. But yeah, you got to start somewhere. But yeah, personal networks are really, really, really key. That was how I met my co-founder, was through a friend of a friend. Total serendipity. So it helps.
And those are huge brands too. Like you're just listing off these brands. I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, well, it helps. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like all this stuff but like a big element of it is, people are trying to like suss you out. Like, and so they like look at your credentials. It's like, oh, you like went to a good school, or oh, you worked at like a good company, and so it's de-risked a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so that stuff like definitely helped. And like the personal networks that come from that, like that's largely how we were able to fundraise really, really quickly, is because I knew a bunch of people in the Silicon Valley space that knew me personally and were like, oh yeah, I believe that you're going to grind away at this thing and figure it out. And if you don't have the personal network, like luckily people want to support founders, especially other founders. It's like, most of my friends now are founders and they're our customers also. So like I like went to Slack channels and found people working similar stuff. And then, like I actually talked to someone yesterday who I had met in a Slack channel for climate tech like 2 years ago, and like circled back when talking about hiring him. One of my roommates now is actually, I met him like a Slack channel for climate tech. He's also working some similar stuff. That's how you like build all of this is just getting out there, really.
That's awesome. So you care, and that puts you into rooms where other people care, and you knock down that first domino. That's great.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. And everyone says no at first, of course. But yeah, all it takes is one yes. And then it goes from there.
Oh, of course. Yeah. All right. You brought up funding. I'm just going to ask you the most basic question. Tell us about your funding journey. What worked? What didn't work? What would you do differently if you could go back?
Yeah. What would I do differently? So I, for a long time, had really resisted the pull of outside funding. And the reason for that was I am still, but very mission oriented. And it was like, no, I want to do things like don't like having a boss. It's like, why you gotta go? Oh yeah. Part. B, like I want to run this my way and with my people, and like essentially not be beholden to, whatever outside force. I think that was like a bit of a naive perspective because I was essentially slogging away trying to build stuff with zero resources and it was really, really hard. And the trade-off essentially is like time and resources. So you can go way faster, obviously, and therefore have a higher likelihood of surviving, which is the whole point of the startup game is that you're by someone, founder Fred told me this, and it's like kind of a negative thing, but you're like default dead. You know, like founders can will stuff to happen. But you need resources to make it happen. Or you can bootstrap it and like it's really, really amazing. People can do it. It just takes longer. And so you have to think about like, what are the trade-offs here? For us, sustainability is moving really fast. And we know there's a ton of venture money going to like similar areas that we're in. And so like, we're not really gonna have a chance. I actually was bootstrapping an idea, was building this app through like Upwork and contractors. And then was like, oh, okay, great. I got my first few customers. And I saw someone doing the exact same thing and raised $10 million and was like, I need to do something else. Yeah, I need to do something else. And so I had then made a decision to go raise money once we had a few customers. So I think the fundraising journey for us was essentially, investors, you can either raise on metrics and traction or you can raise in hopes and dreams. It's like wise advice I heard once. Yeah. And the combination of both is like the best. And metrics never lie. So if you have traction, it's like, oh, okay, great. Like, guess it's going. And so what we did was essentially find our first champion customers and get letters of intent to say like, hey, if you build this product, we will buy it with some varying, some degree of like commitment on that. And then between me and Anisha, we like, had a compelling story to then go out into this market and say like, hey, we know how to solve this problem. We have these Patagonia guys who are going to help us do it. And we were able to fundraise pretty quickly. I think there's a lot of like tactical tips on fundraising, but I think for us, it was pretty important on being able to then hire other real team members and have a chance here. If we didn't do it, like, yeah, I owned 100% of the company when I was in my parents' basement. 100% of what? Right. Of something that like doesn't exist. And now I own a way smaller portion of that. But it's like, I think startups are binary outcomes. You either do well and survive and become a real business or you don't. And you kind of want to like, at least for me, like want to fail fast if it's not going to work out, which means you have to have resources and like give it a real shot, not be like stuck in purgatory for a long time wondering if it's going to work.
Yeah. I think I'd rather know sooner than later if I wasn't going to make it. Yeah. I'm having a moment where I had a thought and it was a good thought and now it's gone.
Oh no.
Lost the sands of time.
I know it happens pretty frequently, unfortunately. Yeah. So you came from, I don't want to say corporate. Like corporate always sounds, it's like a negative buzzword these days. But like you came from podcast. Yeah. Right. Like, but you came from like well-established companies, Dropbox and Glossier, and now you're in the startup world. How did your previous experiences kind of change how you run your company now?
Man, how I run my company now? Yeah. I mean, like anything, you like pick up experiences and you see things and you're like, that like works really well. Like, oh, wow, okay, like hard lesson learned. I'm not going to forget that one. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that happens across the board. Like, I think the most important thing is like product, how you develop a product. People want to know that, how you build a team, like those two being like, I mean, team being the most important thing. And like, like when you're working at these companies, you see how people are organized into these organisms with their own cultures and ways of operating that keep people happy, motivated, or really demotivated, unproductive. So I mean, I don't want to get like too deep into like a lot of the lessons, but there are a lot of like amazing lessons that I could like both on the positive and negative side or constructive and wherever how you want to phrase that. And so I think like specifically I came into the intent to say like, hey, I want to design a culture that's really supportive, empathetic, and clearly people really communicate and are outcomes oriented. And so like that I had influences from management with like Adam Grant, that this like management guru from school. Like a lot of the Patagonia guys we work with are like almost like spiritual advisors about how to like organize our team. and be outcome and mission oriented. And then, you essentially hire a bunch of people and bring them on, or as co-founders also, but people who care about the same things, have the same ethos. And then you can construct from there this foundation that like builds the same way and treats people the same way. So yeah, nothing's perfect. You're trying, obviously you're like iterating on your startup product and like culture and everything. And you're I don't think like I think experiences will definitely maximize likelihood of success, but it's not like necessary. Like you'll figure it out as you go. Just surround yourself with people who kind of know what they're doing, and like make sure you're on the same page with your team about what you're trying to learn and things are working or not, and then how to improve. And then that ultimately is like probably the lesson is like just iterate, like be receptive to feedback at the end of the day.
Yeah. And then when you find something that works, run with it.
Yeah.
And I mean, y'all have a pretty impressive client base so far. How have you really built that up? Was that from connections that you had built previously?
Yeah. So, and this is the kind of same dynamic that I was talking about earlier with like fundraising and hiring and everything. It's like people want to pick winners. At the end of the day, like they want to pick people they like believe in and missions they believe in, and then like things are going to work. And so like if you have a really small startup, like it's a big risk for a larger company to take on. But like, if you are selling to other startups, they get it. Like you're talking to founders who want to support you. And so the way we got started was like, finding the first customer. It's always the hardest. You have to like not beg, but you have to like really hope you find the right person who believes in what you're doing and will give you like work with you to co-develop this stuff. Because they know that like it's in flux. Like we kind of fell into a trap a little bit, like trying to like, say like, oh, we have this amazing thing, but like still in development, and then like you like don't hit expectations. And it doesn't work out well. So like the way we have handled it, I think a little bit better is saying like, hey, we're super transparent here about what our product is and where it's going. And we just want to find the champions in these organizations who are going to get us started. So for us, I had worked at Glossier, and then Russ, who I actually come from Patagonia, really cared about sustainability internally and was driving it. It was like, oh my God, like, yeah, what you guys are building is amazing. Like the general shape of it, we'll just be design partners, and you can refer to us as a logo, and we'll give you feedback on an ongoing basis. And from there, similar thing, we point to Glossier. Hey, we have them, and it makes it easier to get more and more startups. And I think over time
hey, look
too,
at this
you kind of like, yeah, exactly. It's the same thing with like, oh, it's not just me. I had this other amazing co-founder. It's like, oh, great. Like maybe I'll come join. Same thing with customers. But yeah, I think over time too, you figure out the sales process a little bit better. Where it's like you're not really sure how to pitch things. You're not really sure how what problem you're solving, and then like you like crystallize that, and then it's way easier to have the same conversation and know how to like disqualify customers or like get them on board.
Yeah. What was kind of your marketing strategy as you were trying to get on the map?
Yeah, marketing is I think a lot of engineers, and myself kind of included, have like a negative interpretation of marketing. So it's like, oh, you're selling things to people they don't want. Like you get like spam, and you're like on Instagram, you're like, I don't want to see this crap.
Right.
But like really what marketing is essentially, you're like, if customers have a problem, you're essentially letting them know that you have a solution. That is like the constructive way to look at it. And so for us, like we essentially don't have a marketing strategy really. Like it's the way we think about it is like, we're essentially just going through personal referrals. It's like, hey, we have our own networks here. It's like, I know a bunch of people who work in the beauty space. That's why we started there. We know there's real problems there. Same with Anisha, my co-founder. So it's all personal referral based. And like, if we wanted to like market it, we actually wouldn't even know how to do it at the beginning. I mean, we like essentially had a bunch of landing pages and surveys and stuff that like tried to test out different types of messaging around problems that we could solve and solutions to solve those problems. And to kind of know how to talk about it from that, but like really it was all personal relationship based, because especially at the beginning of a startup, you essentially need partnership. And so it's like, we haven't purchased any ads or anything like that. At all. And the strategy here is like, well, work with a bunch of brands and who really care about what you're doing, and then they will market on your behalf. So they're going to be taking a lot of our data and like putting it on their websites and PR and everything, and like the idea is like, then other brands will be like, oh wow, okay, like that's actually impactful. And customers hopefully will ask for that kind of stuff. We'll see how it goes, but that's how we're starting at least.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say I work in marketing, but I have a marketing background, and I think the marketing as a 4-letter word is pretty common in the startup sphere, and personal referrals end up meaning a lot to customers. It's like, all right, these people have a connection, and that's why I'm seeing this in front of me now. Or like, you know, if Ethan recommends a restaurant to me, I'm more likely to go there than if Yelp pops up in my email inbox like, hey, try this restaurant. So it's a valuable strategy.
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
exactly.
Like by far. Like I can't like LinkedIn cold DM rate is like pretty low, you know. But having personal referrals, I think, is always it can at least get you a meeting.
Right.
Which is
exactly.
Kind of all you can ask for is to continue getting meetings and then learn.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
So I'm going to take it back to the basics. What was something that surprised you when you launched your own startup? What was something that was 10 times harder than you wanted it to be, that you thought it would be? And what was something that was a whole lot easier than you thought it would be?
Yeah. It's a good question. People say startups are hard. They are hard. It's like an emotional roller coaster that I didn't fully appreciate. And like I knew it was going to be hard intellectually, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm sitting in this, and this is like the slog. Like for example, like on a given day, this is like such a stupid example, but like I laugh at this. I actually sent it to my founder friends. I'm like, oh, look at this ridiculous day I had. Like signed. We're really excited about a candidate. We signed them the day before. I then sent out an offer letter with the wrong equity that was signed. It's like dumb. We had a customer come through, and then 2 customers dropped out, and then a major retailer comes through. Is like interested, and then our product doesn't work. It's like all on the same day.
Oh, God.
You have like these series of like existential threats that make you question why you're doing it. And you're like, wow, is this really worth it? Which is why I think it's really important to bake mission in, because that's like the fire that like keeps people going, especially new hires, because they're all like really care about the outcome rather than just, like increasing sales or getting rich or whatever. Not that that's like a bad thing. Everyone has different preferences, but I think the mission orientation like really helps with persevering, especially for climate stuff. So yeah, I didn't fully appreciate that. And I'm like, now I know it. And like you get tired. But this is where like things get easier. To the other side of your question is you have like a good team around you that supports you. And so like having co-founders is like so critical for me, at least, because, if one person, you essentially need at least one person carrying the baton forward and like willing things into existence wherever you can. You can't will product market fit, but you can will like presence in the market. And so like that has made things way, way easier. And like have been some of my highest functioning relationships I've ever had in my life. And like I have a whole host of like tips about how to do that, but that has made it way easier in some ways, even the hard parts. There's a lot of other things. Getting initial customers is always gonna be hard, but that's just like what it is, unless you like, I think, like, get a little lucky. We're in a harder, I think, place because we're like essentially creating a market. It's not like, oh, all these brands already buy sustainability software, and now like they're just buying this better one. It's like they like haven't done it before and are making investments, but like, they don't know how to think about it or see it. They've never seen it before. So creating a market is definitely hard as well. I guess just quickly on the co-founder point, I would highly recommend, like depending on the personality type, some people are just visionaries and can like go by themselves. I am not like that. And so I was like very clear in trying to find someone who's like skill set kind of like complementary and also value aligned. So I used like the first round capital founders like dating questionnaire, which like was super helpful, honestly. It was great. Like, so for example, you kind of know like, oh, hey, what happens when you get stressed or anxious? Like, how do I recognize that and how do I support you? Like, that's like a huge thing. Like, if you know that up front, Like, what are those triggers? Okay, great. Like, we'll organize a work so that happens. Not that much. And so, like, I kind of wish I had it. I mean, this is a ridiculous thing. I'm not even going to say it, but like, I think, let's just say I've had some friends who have dated and have gone through this stuff. And like, oh, I'm not really sure how to show for them. Like, you should just use the First Round Capital dating questionnaire. Like, it's just like a problem. But it was really helpful in getting aligned, especially because co-founders, if that relationship blows up, the entire company's toast. So you want to make sure you get it right from the beginning.
Oh yeah, I would fully support like the dating app of startup founders and how to add to your team. Yeah. There's algorithms for that. I mean, it would be so cool. Sorry, I'm looking at some messages. What does scale look like for you? Like you're here, you're now, this is your present. What does it look like in an ideal world?
Yeah, I think for early stage startups, focus is important. Like one of the most important things. There's like, you're kind of threading the needle here a little bit, in which you're trying to start in such a narrow focus where you like crush a pain point for one type of customer, because you don't have that many resources. You can't, if you try to do too much, you're going to be nothing to everybody versus like something to a very small number of people. Then the question is like, oh, well, can you hit scale so this becomes a meaningful business? So you have to like essentially either like layer on pain points that you can solve for this person, or like find other people who have similar pain points. And for us, like a challenge at the beginning was like, there's demand for sustainability, decision-making, and marketing everywhere. Like big companies really are spending tons of money on it, but they have way different levels of sophistication and needs than like the startup who like has 10 people. Right. And so for us, like, if our key job here at the beginning is to make sure our initial customers, A, we have initial customers, B, that we keep them really happy. And then that there's like a path toward growing after that. So we essentially have this pilot program, which is designed to be small, to prove out that this stuff like really, our product really works, that we know how to price it. And like, so it becomes a no-brainer and create all these case studies in that market. So that when we're ready for launch, we can essentially go and say, hey, this is like the new way of doing things. So for us right now, scale is explicitly not the goal, but it is the goal to eventually get to scale and do it in a sane way. So yeah, I think the idea is like start small. And then like in the background, there's actually a really great book on this called Traction by the DuckDuckGo founder, who talks about like parallelizing both product development and essentially figure out distribution. Because the idea being like, well, if you have a great product, you can't figure out how to distribute it, what's the point? And vice versa. And which is actually was a new way of thinking for me, because I'm like a product person. And so like while we have this pilot program and are really laser focused on solving problems, keeping these customers happy with good product, I'm also like experimenting on how we can figure out distribution, get a scale for when we're ready, a little bit down the line when this pilot program is done. And that's where like some of these retailers come into play, some of these editorial outlets. And so we're essentially experimenting with a lot of those things and seeing like what's going to create this interest list that we can deploy to. So it's an iterative process. So I think over time, by the end of the year, like a year from now, it's going to look way different. We'll have like way more brands, we'll have like way more presence in the space, but by design, we're keeping it small now so that we like are really sure that we're doing the right thing and can go to market.
Yeah. Well, in a year, we're just going to have you back. So heads up on that
retrospective.
We'll be like, where are you at now? But yeah, I think I love the honesty in your answer. It's like, here's where we're at, and we're not just going to throw features out to see what sticks. Like, we want to make sure we're making the most solid moves that we can. So definitely like that a lot.
It's been tough. Because especially for any company that's like thinking about like, oh, like what's my target customer? It's like the small, this is like super zoomed out, but like it's a small business or like an enterprise deal. Like you can get small businesses way faster, but they're lower contract value versus like a huge deal that like takes forever to close and like has custom requirements that you might be developing forever. Like for us, it's been a challenge because we've gotten interests from both of them, and then how do you prioritize? And so you're simultaneously being like, I want to develop value really fast because that's our core advantage. Startup is going fast. the same time, I want credibility, which comes from large companies and logos. So, like you essentially you have to get creative, but still maintain focus. And I think ultimately, like the key thing is like finding those champions who want to work with you and co-develop so that you are on the right track. But yeah, focus is the number one thing. Our designer says it all the time. He literally has, he's gonna kill me for saying this, but he has like less tattooed on his hand as a principle to live by. It's like, just do less, like, and focus. And you're gonna survive. You die from like indigestion, not like, doing too little.
I'm a designer and now, so I'm totally going to get a tattoo that says less somewhere. So that's like the biggest chunk of feedback for product designers and graphic designers and UX designers is like, do less. Your point A to point B should be one step instead of 16. But we like to see pretty fancy things. So who knows? All right, Jamie, what is your advice for aspiring entrepreneurs, specifically those in the sustainability or SaaS industries?
My advice, general advice is always funny because it's like kind of shooting from the hip a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm saying like,
yep.
This may or may not be relevant to you. I think the general principles though that come to mind are, one, to just put things out there. Like I know myself and like a bunch of other founders like are afraid to like, I have this idea, but I'm either not sure it's going to be right and I'm like embarrassed by getting negative reception, or I have this amazing idea and like it's going to be the next $1 billion company, so I don't want to tell anyone about it. You need feedback, and like your company is the product of like a shared pool of knowledge and expertise to make better decisions. So you need feedback, and if you don't do it, you're not going to know if your idea is good. You'll just spend a lot of time. I wasted a ton of time that. That's like product, 101 is like, making sure you're solving a real problem and knowing what the problems are. So you have to like make sure there's a real problem, and you have to talk to people that way. I think there's many interesting ways to do that. I've actually found, so the good book on this called The Mom Test, which has some strategies about how to get like rapid customer feedback. So it's like, how do you find people to talk to you about this stuff? Do you survey? Do you go to trade shows? Depends on your company and what you're doing. But for B2B, like going to trade shows is great because there's customers there. You can just talk to them all the time, super casually. And then the trick is, how do you actually know if they're telling you the truth? Because everyone, people want to be liked, especially around sustainability. There's a lot of signaling in there. So it's hard to know if you're solving a real problem, if people are actually going to buy the thing you're building. That's a whole difficult thing, a difficult lesson we learned as well, honestly. That's, I would say, number one, read that book. It's great. Number two, I think, is being really, really thoughtful from the beginning about what it is your vision is and what you're trying to accomplish as a company. That has made it way easier to hire, way easier to get through hard times. And people talk about like, like mission, vision, values, like that stuff is big company things, but like, no, we put up a job description, people like really resonate with that stuff. And also our customers too, because we treat them the same way. They're outlined in our values. So I think that's actually like pretty important. It can feel academic, but it's like really good forcing function, especially if you have co-founders. Be like, wait, like, hey, like instead of having to reinvent the wheel every single time you make a decision, just point to the values. Like it's already there. We already did this decision making. That resolves like, like do we have a 401k plan or whatever? Like stupid questions like that. It's like, well, like it's kind of already covered the values, and it's really helpful to reinforce culture, top down and bottoms up too. I think another one is like be thoughtful about the resources you need in order to be successful. That's like human capital, so the knowledge, expertise, financial capital, and like relationships. There's probably another one I'm missing. Yeah, this is like all outlined in I'm just name dropping books at this point for people, like the co-founder or the founder's dilemma, and also Hard Thing About Hard Things. Like talk a lot about this stuff. That's really important because if you're gonna go fundraising, like you should know why, because there are like bringing on VC investors or whatever isn't a bad thing. It's just different. Like there's a different set of expectations. You have like they can also like lend a ton of help as well. Like our angel investors have been amazing. So like we have, for example, like the CEO of Grove Collaborative, a marketplace for like sustainable goods, essentially, like, helps us all the time with intros and like strategy. So it's amazing. So think about like what you need, both from a money standpoint and from a people and knowledge standpoint, both for your team and advisors, and you can like actually solve both things with fundraising, versus just saying, I want to raise a shit ton of money like as fast as possible, and then like do what? You might be biting off too much, for example, and setting yourself up for like a gnarly Series A. Those are three things that come to mind. I'm sure there's a bunch of others, but
yeah, you'll think about it later tonight when you're like trying to go to sleep, like, oh man. But just to interject real quick, Ethan, I'm sorry. I personally love that your mission and values keep kind of nudging you back in the direction that you intended to. It just seems like a theme that keeps occurring as you're talking. And I love that. So it's like bumper bowling. Like you have one direction and it's the one I wanted it to go in. So perfect.
Yeah. I mean, and for us, it holds us accountable. So like, for example, we see, if you're talking to customers, you can find problems to solve they're willing to pay for, but does it actually lead to the end impact you want? That's a hard Venn diagram to get right. And so like we essentially have to resist that stuff and maybe layer it in as a way to then get to impact, but you have to like super honest about it. And even potentially more importantly, then it like essentially is this co-developed way of instructing the entire organization for how to treat each other and make decisions too. Because like I don't want to make every decision as CEO. Like I'm hiring people because they're smarter than I am, and know things I don't. And so I would rather equip them with values, like, hey, here's essentially what we're trying to accomplish from a mission and vision standpoint, and like the way we want to make decisions with these values and the way of essentially operating principles to like go forth and like own the outcome. Just makes it way easier for everybody.
That's great advice. Jamie, we really appreciate you coming on the show. Is there anything you'd like to share with listeners before we wrap this up? If people want to follow Bluebird Climate or reach out to you, is there a best place for them to do that?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I mean, generally what I'll say is like sustainability is this conundrum that means everything and nothing at the same time. It's like really important to people personally, but also like takes a back seat sometimes. I think if you are a brand in apparel, food and beverage, beauty, personal care, and you're like curious about this stuff, just let me know. You can find me at jamie@bluebirdclimate.com or on our website at bluebirdclimate.com. Like, and we're essentially in the market here, like educating people, not trying to sell you things. So if you have questions, like we are always happy to help and are going to like point you in the right direction, whether you're just starting out or like are this crazy insurgent brand trying to make like a carbon negative, like whatever it is. But yeah, I think like persevering. If you're a startup founder, also like, just know that things can be hard. Like I think Ben Horowitz said in Hard Thing About Hard Things, you're in a constant state of like elation and just like complete dejection, going back and forth.
Yes.
You can decide to make things not crazy as much as you possibly can in your values and how you work with each other. Also know that those things are going to come up and make your life a little crazy, but it's okay. Like you know why you're doing this and for yourself, and that should be the fire. And if you need, I would highly recommend finding like other founder friends who you can get advice from too and support if you need it. But it's a fun journey and definitely encourage people to get on it.
Awesome. Excellent advice. Go find your founder friends. Well, folks, we're going to put all of these links, all the book recommendations, everything from this show, we're going to put in the show notes. But that's a wrap. That is another episode of the Startup Savant podcast in the can. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us today. You know what? We want to hear what you think. If you think we're doing a good job, let us know in the comments over at startupsavant.com/podcast. You know me, I'm always fishing for compliments. But hey, if you think we're awful, let us know in the comments over at startupsavant.com/podcast. We're always looking for ways to improve and bring you the inspiration and information you need to succeed. If you really love the show, head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. As you know, this is a new show, so reviews really help us to get the show in front of more listeners just like you. For tools, guides, videos, startup stories, and so much more, head over to truic.com. That's truic.com, truic.com. quantifying.com. See you, folks.
Bye, everyone.